What if I told you that one of the most powerful tools for preventing muscle loss as we age isn't a supplement, isn't a shake, and doesn't come from a lab, but from a simple food that contains more high-quality protein than eggs? And more importantly, what if this food could help you fight sarcopenia, the age loss of muscle mass and strength, faster and more effectively than you've been led to believe? Sarcopenia doesn't announce itself overnight. It creeps in slowly. A few pounds of lean mass lost in your 40s, maybe a little less grip strength in your 50s, more fatigue walking upstairs in your 60s. And the implications go far beyond vanity. Muscle is not just about strength or aesthetics, it's a central organ of longevity. It helps regulate glucose, maintain balance and mobility, and protect us from falls, fractures, and even metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes. By the time most people realize how much muscle they've lost, it's already compromised their quality of life. But here's the good news. Sarcopenia is not inevitable. It's modifiable. And diet plays a central role, not just in how much protein you consume, but in the quality of that protein, how it's distributed throughout the day, and how it interacts with your training and recovery practices. In today's episode, we're diving deep into one surprising food that often gets overlooked in conversations about protein, even though it may be more effective than eggs at supporting muscle protein synthesis. We'll explore the evidence around its amino acid profile, its anabolic potential, and its benefits in the context of aging physiology. I'll also share practical strategies for incorporating this food into your diet, especially if you're over 40 and starting to think about how to preserve muscle and strength for the long haul. But we won't stop there. We'll expand the discussion to understand why protein needs increase with age, how muscle mass acts as a metabolic sink and glucose regulator, the crucial role of resistance training in staving off age decline, and what real-world interventions, grounded in randomized controlled trials, actually show about muscle preservation and healthy aging. This is not about chasing quick fixes. It's about building a foundation for a healthier, more independent future. One where you can play with your grandkids, carry your own groceries, and stay resilient into your 70s, 80s, and beyond. Let's dig in. Let's start with a fundamental but often misunderstood truth. As we age, our body's ability to build and preserve muscle declines. Not because we suddenly lack the will to stay active or eat well, but because of something called anabolic resistance. This is a physiological shift that makes muscle tissue less responsive to the usual anabolic stimuli, namely dietary protein and resistance exercise. In other words, the same protein dose that would have effectively supported muscle protein synthesis at age 25 might have only half the effect by age 65. In a 2011 paper published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, researchers demonstrated that older adults need a higher dose of essential amino acids, particularly leucine, to trigger the same anabolic response that younger individuals get with lower protein intake. This is why the recommended dietary allowance for protein, 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, is not just outdated for older adults, it's potentially harmful if followed rigidly. Think about that for a moment. The RDA is the minimum required to avoid deficiency, not the optimal level for thriving. And yet many adults over 50 still aim for this minimum, assuming it's sufficient for health and longevity. Multiple randomized controlled trials have now shown that a more appropriate target for aging adults is closer to 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, and that this protein needs to be distributed across meals rather than concentrated in a single sitting. A 2013 study in the Journal of Nutrition compared adults who consumed the majority of their daily protein at dinner to those who distributed it evenly across breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The group with evenly distributed intake showed significantly greater muscle protein synthesis. So what does this mean practically? Let's say you weigh 150 pounds. That's roughly 68 kilograms. That puts your optimal protein intake between 82 and 109 grams per day. If you're splitting that across 3 meals, you're looking at 27 to 36 grams of protein per meal, ideally with at least 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal to overcome anabolic resistance and stimulate muscle repair and growth. Now, here's where things get interesting. Not all protein sources are created equal when it comes to amino acid composition, digestibility, or absorption speed. A food may have 30 grams of protein, but if it's low in leucine, poorly digested, or absorbed too slowly, it might not cross the leucine threshold needed to actually activate muscle growth. Eggs, for example, are often seen as a nearly perfect protein, and they are quite good. A large egg contains about 6 grams of protein with a solid amino acid profile and relatively high bioavailability. But here's the catch. You'd need to eat 4 to 5 eggs in a single meal to hit the leucine threshold. That's doable, but not ideal for everyone. In later sections, we'll introduce a food source that exceeds eggs in anabolic efficiency, particularly for older adults. But for now, the key takeaway is this. If you're over 40, your protein strategy has to be intentional. It's not just about how much protein you eat, it's about when you eat it, what kind you're eating, and whether you're pairing it with the right type of training stimulus to send the muscle-preserving signal your body needs. This raises a reflective question. When was the last time you looked at your breakfast and asked, am I getting enough high-quality protein to support my muscle health today? Not for short-term energy, but for my long-term strength and resilience. It's a different way of thinking about nutrition. Not reactive, but proactive. Not just about avoiding illness, but building capacity for a longer, healthier life. In upcoming segments, we'll dive into specific foods, including one that surpasses eggs, and strategies that can help you optimize protein intake without feeling like you're living in a lab. But the foundation starts here. Understanding that your protein needs don't plateau with age, they rise, and meeting those needs isn't about chasing perfection. It's about consistency, awareness, and aligning your nutrition with what the science actually tells us about aging and muscle preservation. Eggs have long held a reputation as the perfect protein, and for good reason. They offer all 9 essential amino acids in an easily digestible form, have a protein digestibility corrected amino acid score PDCAAS of 1, the highest possible, and are relatively affordable. But when it comes to optimizing muscle protein synthesis, especially in older adults dealing with anabolic resistance, there's a lesser known but more powerful protein source that deserves the spotlight: whey protein. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not promoting supplements for the sake of convenience or fads. This is about leveraging a food-based intervention with one of the most robust clinical profiles for muscle preservation. And whey protein consistently ranks at the top of that list. Whey, a byproduct of cheese production, is rich in leucine, the key amino acid that acts as a molecular trigger for muscle protein synthesis. While one large egg contains about 0.5 grams of leucine, a typical 25-gram scoop of whey protein isolate contains around 2.7 grams of leucine, just enough to cross the leucine threshold required to stimulate MPS, muscle protein synthesis, in older adults. In a 2009 randomized controlled trial published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, researchers compared the effects of different protein sources on muscle protein synthesis in elderly men. The group that consumed 20 grams of whey protein post-exercise showed significantly greater MPS compared to groups consuming either casein or soy. The reason? Whey has a higher leucine content and is absorbed more rapidly response, leading to a stronger and quicker anabolic response. But here's the nuance. It's not just about supplements. Whey can be thought of as a functional food, something that exists in the gray area between whole food and clinical intervention. It's derived from milk, minimally processed in isolate or concentrate form, and has decades of data supporting its safety, efficacy, and role in combating sarcopenia. A 2018 meta-analysis in Nutrients looked at older adults who were supplemented with whey protein alongside resistance training. The findings were striking. Compared to controls, the whey plus resistance group saw greater increases in lean body mass, strength, and functional performance. In other words, whey didn't just help people build more muscle, it helped them move better and live more independently. And that's the real goal here, not just adding muscle mass, but preserving mobility, autonomy, and quality of life. There's also a sustainability angle to this. Whey is a byproduct, which means utilizing it as a protein source actually helps reduce food waste in the dairy industry. For those concerned about ethical sourcing, grass-fed whey products and regenerative dairy models offer a viable path forward. This isn't about good versus bad foods. It's about making informed, strategic decisions that align with your goals, values, and physiology. Now, a question I often hear is, why not just eat more whole foods instead of reaching for whey? That's a valid question, and in some cases, it's a great idea. But here's the challenge. Many people, especially older adults, struggle to hit that 30 gram per meal protein target using whole foods alone, especially at breakfast. Whey offers a simple, fast-absorbing, and effective way to complement whole food meals, particularly when appetite, time, or chewing ability is a barrier. If you're consuming oatmeal or toast in the morning, you're likely starting your day without enough anabolic support. Adding a whey shake or even stirring whey into Greek yogurt or blending it into a smoothie can change that within minutes. So let's reframe this. Are you getting enough of the right kind of protein to support not just your energy today, but your strength 10, 20, or 30 years from now? If you're over 40, and especially if you're over 60, your muscles' ability to respond to food is changing. Your job isn't just to eat more, it's to eat smarter. Whey protein isn't a magic bullet, but it is a powerful tool, and when combined with resistance training, which we'll discuss next, it becomes part of a strategy that not only prevents sarcopenia, but helps you reclaim control over your trajectory as you age. If you're finding this helpful and want more practical, evidence-based strategies for optimizing your longevity, hit subscribe. We're building a community here rooted in science, clarity, and long-term thinking, and you're part of it. We often think of muscle as something we train in the gym, something aesthetic, mechanical, or tied to athleticism. But when it comes to longevity, muscle is far more than just a source of strength or movement. It's a metabolic organ, a reservoir for glucose regulation, and a predictor of lifespan. Let's unpack that. Muscle is the largest site of glucose disposal in the body. In fact, skeletal muscle accounts for roughly 70 to 80% of insulin-stimulated glucose uptake. When you consume carbohydrates, your pancreas secretes insulin, which signals your cells, especially muscle, to absorb glucose and use it for energy or storage. The more muscle mass you have and the more metabolically active that muscle is, the better your insulin sensitivity tends to be. This becomes critical with age. As muscle mass declines, whether from inactivity, poor nutrition, or hormonal changes, the body loses one of its primary mechanisms for maintaining healthy blood glucose levels. Over time, this contributes to insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, and an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. In other words, muscle isn't just for strength. It's a buffer against metabolic disease, and the evidence bears this out. A study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism in 2014 found that higher muscle mass was independently associated with lower all-cause mortality in older adults, even after controlling for BMI and fat mass. That's important because it suggests that being normal weight isn't necessarily protective if you're lacking lean mass underneath. Similarly, the Health ABC study, which tracked over 3,000 older adults, found that those with the greatest losses in thigh muscle volume had significantly higher risks of mobility disability and mortality, regardless of their body weight. This reframes the conversation from one focused purely on weight loss to one centered around functional mass. This is also where we begin to appreciate muscle as an endocrine organ. Contracting muscle releases myokines, signaling molecules that influence systemic inflammation, mitochondrial function, and even brain health. One such myokine, irisin, has been shown to promote the browning of fat tissue and improve insulin sensitivity. Others have anti-inflammatory effects, protecting against chronic low-grade inflammation, a key driver of aging and disease. So when you preserve or build muscle, you're not just increasing your physical strength. You're sending biochemical signals throughout the body that affect your brain, your heart, your metabolism, and your immune system. And here's a point that's often overlooked. Sarcopenia rarely exists in isolation. It's tightly linked to frailty, cognitive decline, falls, fractures, and hospitalizations. Once muscle mass drops below a certain threshold, everything becomes harder, not just physically, but metabolically. Your ability to recover from surgery, fight off infection, or tolerate chemotherapy can all be impacted by the amount of functional muscle you carry. That's why when we talk about adding muscle, we're not talking about vanity. We're talking about resilience, your ability to withstand and recover from stress, whether that's an illness, injury, or the basic physiological wear and tear of aging. So what does this mean for your daily life? Start reframing your muscle mass as protective capital, not unlike your savings account. The more you invest in it early and often, the more buffer you have when life throws challenges your way. And if you're starting later in life, the good news is that muscle is adaptive at any age. Even individuals in their 70s, 80s, and beyond can gain strength and increase lean mass with the right training and nutrition. This brings us to a practical reflection. Are you treating muscle like a luxury, something extra, or like the essential organ of longevity it truly is? This shift in mindset is critical. It reframes movement from punishment to investment and nutrition from restriction to fuel. You're not just preserving the ability to lift weights, you're preserving the ability to live independently, to enjoy your life, and to recover when life gets hard. In the next section, we'll explore how resistance training activates this entire system, from mechanical loading to gene expression, and why it's one of the most powerful interventions for extending health span. Nutrition is only half the equation. Without the right mechanical signal, the physical stimulus that tells your muscles they're needed, even the most dialed-in protein intake won't do much. This is why resistance training is not optional when it comes to aging well. It's essential. Let's begin with a concept that might seem simple, but is physiologically profound: mechanical loading. When you load a muscle through resistance exercise like lifting weights, using resistance bands, or even body weight movements, you trigger a cascade of intracellular events that ultimately lead to muscle protein synthesis, MPS. These signals include the activation of pathways like mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin, which serves as the master regulator of muscle growth. Now, here's where the synergy comes in. Resistance training primes the muscle to respond to protein intake. In other words, exercise sensitizes your muscle cells to amino acids. That same protein shake or high leucine meal will have a more powerful anabolic effect when it follows resistance training than when taken in isolation. This is especially critical for combating sarcopenia, which is not just a matter of getting weaker, it's the loss of functional independence, the inability to stand up from a chair unassisted, carry groceries, or catch yourself during a fall. Isn't a result of sudden aging. It's a consequence of decades of undertraining. A 2017 systematic review and meta-analysis published in Aging Research Reviews found that resistance training was the single most effective intervention for reversing sarcopenia in older adults. Not medication, not aerobic exercise alone, resistance training. Moreover, the study showed that even twice-weekly training sessions led to measurable gains in strength, lean mass, and physical performance. And the intensity doesn't need to be extreme. For most people, especially those new to training or in later life stages, starting with bodyweight exercises or light dumbbells is sufficient. The key variable is progressive overload, gradually increasing the resistance, volume, or complexity over time to continue challenging the muscle. This is where many people go wrong. They either do nothing, thinking they're too old, or they do the same workout week after week, never challenging the body enough to adapt. But research, including trials in 80 and 90-year-olds, has shown that even individuals with significant frailty can make gains in strength and muscle size with just 8 to 12 weeks of progressive resistance training. Let's look at an example. The LIFE study, Lifestyle Interventions and Independence for Elders, followed over 1,600 older adults and found that a modest, structured resistance training program reduced disability and improved mobility outcomes over a 2-year period. These weren't elite athletes, they were everyday people trying to preserve their independence. So what should a basic evidence-lined resistance training routine look like? Start with 2 to 3 sessions per week. Focus on compound movements, squats, lunges, presses, rows, movements that engage multiple muscle groups and mimic real-life activities. Aim for 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions per exercise, resting 60 to 90 seconds between sets. And don't worry if you can't do everything perfectly at first. Consistency trumps complexity. If you're new to this and wondering how to begin, here's a simple reflection. When was the last time your muscles felt challenged, in a good way, by something you intentionally did to make them stronger? If you can't recall, that's okay. It means you have room to grow. And the good news is, adaptation starts with any meaningful resistance, even air squats beside a kitchen counter, even lifting soup cans or water bottles. The key is that it must be deliberate and repeatable. Finally, don't underestimate the psychological benefits of strength training. It improves confidence, balance, cognitive function, and mood. The feeling of regaining control over your body is empowering, and that empowerment extends into every other area of your life. If you're finding this level of depth useful, hit that subscribe button. We're creating this content for people who don't want hype. They want clarity, truth, and tools that actually work. And your support helps us reach more people on this path. In the next section, we'll break down the science of leucine thresholds, why some meals build muscle while others fall short, and how to structure your protein intake for optimal results. Not all protein is created equal, and not all meals stimulate muscle growth the same way. This has everything to do with a concept called the leucine threshold. To recap briefly, leucine is one of the 9 essential amino acids, but it's uniquely powerful when it comes to muscle protein synthesis, MPS. Think of leucine as the ignition key for your muscle building engine. Without enough of it in a single meal, you may fall short of triggering MPS, especially as you age and your muscles become more resistant to anabolic signals. The research here is compelling. A 2006 study published in the Journal of Physiology found that older adults required roughly 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal to maximally stimulate MPS, compared to around 1.8 grams in younger adults. Why the difference? Again, it's anabolic resistance. With age, your muscles become less sensitive to the same amount of stimulus. So the bar or threshold gets higher. Here's the problem. Many common meals, even if they look high protein on paper, don't cross this threshold. A bowl of oatmeal with almond butter and fruit, healthy, yes, but barely 10 to 15 grams of protein and less than a gram of leucine. A single egg and toast, closer, but still not enough. If you're not getting enough leucine per meal, you may still be meeting your overall protein intake, but without driving the physiological signal needed to preserve or build lean mass. That's like putting fuel in your car without ever turning the key. So what does it take to hit that leucine threshold? Let's look at some examples. 3 whole eggs provide tilde 1.3 grams of leucine. 4 ounces, 113 g of chicken breast equals tilde 2.8 grams. 1 scoop of whey isolate equals tilde 2.7 grams. 6 ounces of Greek yogurt plus 1 scoop whey equals tilde 3 grams. 1 cup cooked lentils equals tilde 1.3 grams, but with lower bioavailability. You can see that it's not just about eating protein. It's about strategically combining foods to get enough leucine in a single meal. For omnivores, this is easier. Eggs, poultry, beef, dairy, and whey all score high. For plant-based eaters, it takes more planning, but it's still doable. Soy, quinoa, lentils, and pea protein blends can all contribute, but you often need larger volumes or smart combinations. It's also worth noting that protein quality matters, especially in older adults. The digestible indispensable amino acid score, DIAS, is now considered a better measure of protein quality than the older PDCA-AS system. On the DIAS scale, whey, eggs, and meat score very high, while some plant sources score lower due to limiting amino acids and lower digestibility. Does that mean plant-based diets are inferior for muscle maintenance? Not necessarily, but it does mean they require more precision. Blending complementary proteins like rice and beans, using fortified plant proteins with added leucine, and paying attention to total volume can all make the difference. There's also a behavioral component here. People tend to underconsume protein at breakfast and overconsume it at dinner. Yet studies show that even distribution of protein intake across meals leads to better MPS over a 24-hour period. This was confirmed in a 2014 study published in the Journal of Nutrition, where subjects consuming 30 grams of protein at breakfast, lunch, and dinner had 25% greater MPS compared to those who consumed most of their protein at dinner. So here's a practical rule of thumb. Aim for at least 30 grams of high-quality protein per meal. Make sure each meal includes at least 2.5 grams of leucine. Use a food tracker, label, or app to get a rough estimate as you build your plate. And here's a question to reflect on. If your goal is to preserve strength and resilience as you age, are your meals actually triggering the adaptations your body needs, or just meeting arbitrary calorie goals? The goal isn't perfection, it's intentionality. Once you understand the mechanism, you can begin to craft meals that do more than just satisfy hunger. They protect your future. In our final core section, we'll bring it all together, a daily muscle-preserving protocol built from evidence, not fads, with real-world habits that are sustainable for the long term. We've explored the science, anabolic resistance, the role of leucine, the synergy between protein and resistance training. Now the question becomes, how do we put all this into practice in a way that is both sustainable and effective? Because here's the truth. Knowing the mechanisms doesn't change your physiology. Consistent daily action does. Let's start with the foundation. your daily structure. What follows is a muscle-preserving framework grounded in current research. Not built for bodybuilders, but designed for aging well, maintaining independence, and optimizing metabolic health. 1. 3 protein-rich meals per day. You've seen the data. To overcome anabolic resistance, you need around 2.5 to 3 grams of leucine per meal. Ideally spread across the day. That usually means aiming for 30 to 40 grams of high-quality protein per meal. Here's how that might look. Breakfast. Greek yogurt, 6 Oz, 1 scoop whey isolate, berries, chia seeds, 35 g protein. Lunch, grilled chicken breast, 5 Oz, quinoa, sautéed vegetables, 40 g protein. Dinner, salmon, 5 Oz, lentils, steamed greens, olive oil, 40 g protein. Even if you're plant-based, this is achievable with smart planning. Soy, pea protein, legumes, grains, and fortified plant-based shakes can all be structured to hit that threshold. 2. Resistance training 2 to 3 times per week. Focus on compound movements, squats, lunges, rows, push-ups, deadlifts. If you're new, start with body weight and resistance bands. If you're experienced, maintain a progressive overload approach, gradually increasing volume or resistance. Keep your sessions simple. 5 to 6 exercises, 2 to 3 sets per movement, 8 to 12 reps per set. Rest 60 to 90 seconds between sets. Time commitment around 30 to 40 minutes. 2 to 3 times per week. That's it. And yes, that's enough to maintain and even build muscle well into your 70s, 80s, and beyond, as confirmed by data from the Sarcopenia Guidelines Consortium and the LIFE study. 3. Zone 2 aerobic work 2 to 4 times per week. This isn't about fat burning, it's about mitochondrial density and endurance. Think of it as training your metabolism to run more efficiently. Walking briskly, cycling, hiking, any activity that gets your heart rate to the point where you can still talk but not sing, for 30 to 45 minutes per session. 4. Prioritize recovery and sleep. Your body builds muscle not while you train, but while you recover. That means 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Managing stress, cortisol blunts anabolic signaling, adequate hydration and micronutrients, magnesium, potassium, vitamin D. A 2021 study in Nutrients showed that poor sleep quality reduced muscle recovery and diminished protein utilization, even when participants hit their protein targets. 5. Monitor and reflect. Start tracking your meals. Not forever, but for 1 to 2 weeks. Using a basic app like Chronometer or MyFitnessPal. This helps you calibrate your perception. You might think you're getting enough protein, but most people aren't, especially at breakfast. Ask yourself weekly, are my meals structured for longevity or convenience? Did I challenge my muscles this week in a way that promotes adaptation? 6. Supplement if needed, but prioritize food. Whey protein, creatine monohydrate, 5g/day, and vitamin D are among the few supplements with robust support for muscle maintenance and longevity. But remember, they're tools, not shortcuts. Creatine, for example, has been shown in older adults to improve strength, increase lean mass, and support cognitive health. It's inexpensive, safe, and well-studied. So what does this all boil down to? If you want to preserve muscle as you age, not for aesthetics, but for function, you need a system. That system isn't complex. It just requires clarity, intention, and consistency. You don't need to train like a bodybuilder. You don't need to track macros for the rest of your life. You don't need perfection. What you do need is a repeatable routine that aligns with how your physiology works. One that nourishes your muscles, challenges them just enough, and gives them the support they need to repair and grow. And maybe most importantly, you need to treat your strength not as something nice to have, but as something vital to preserve. In the final section, we'll pull together the key ideas and issue a small challenge that can help you move forward this week. No hype, just action. Let's take a moment to zoom out and recap what we've covered, not just as isolated facts, but as a cohesive strategy for preserving strength, metabolic function, and independence as you age. First, we established that protein needs rise with age, not because your body becomes inefficient, but because your muscles become more resistant to the normal anabolic signals they once responded to easily. To overcome this, we need meals that meet a higher leucine threshold, ideally around 2.5 to 3 grams per meal, which often translates to 30 to 40 grams of high-quality protein spaced throughout the day. We then explored a food that outperforms even eggs in this regard, whey protein. It's not a gimmick, it's a clinically validated intervention that can support lean mass in older adults more effectively than most other whole food sources, particularly when paired with strength training. We looked at muscle as a central organ of longevity, not just for movement or strength, but as a metabolic sink, a buffer against insulin resistance, a signaling center for hormones and inflammation, and a reserve that supports recovery from illness, surgery, or injury. The evidence is clear. More muscle, better health span. But muscle doesn't grow by protein alone. That's where resistance training becomes non-negotiable. You don't need to lift heavy. You need to lift consistently. 2 to 3 sessions a week, even with body weight movements, is enough to produce real change even in your 70s, 80s, or beyond. Then we broke down leucine thresholds and why not all meals stimulate muscle growth equally. If you're not structuring your meals intentionally, you may be eating enough protein in total, but still understimulating your muscle tissue, especially at breakfast. This is one of the most underappreciated drivers of sarcopenia. And finally, we tied all these pieces into a practical, repeatable daily protocol, a system that includes structured meals, progressive resistance training, aerobic conditioning, and sleep, not as checkboxes, but as investments in your future self. Because that's what this is really about, preserving the capacity to live well, not just longer, but better. So here's a simple challenge. For the next 7 days, aim for 3 protein-rich meals per day, at least 30 grams of protein each, and include 2 short resistance training sessions, nothing fancy, just enough to turn the switch on. Pay attention to how your body responds. Energy, recovery, confidence, movement. Then ask yourself, what would it look like if I did this not just for a week, but for the rest of my life? That's the question longevity asks. Not how fast can you fix something, but how wisely can you build? If this resonated, consider joining us on this journey. Like, comment, and subscribe, not for vanity metrics, but to help us build a community of people committed to aging intelligently, intentionally, and with strength. Your future self will thank you.